Hello and welcome to Conversations with Amy Berger. This is a brand new series with Amy Berger brought to you by Adapt Your Life. And today we're going to be chatting about weight loss stall myths. We also have a bonus for you. It's Amy Berger's 8 reasons not to trust the scale. And we'll put a link for you in the description. How are you doing, Amy?
I'm good. How are you doing, Glenn?
Very, very good. Thank you. And thank you for joining us again today. Amy, you've written a great book on stalls called The Stall Slayer. And one of the things that amaze me is that so many folks think that they've stalled when in fact they haven't. What percentage of folks would you say are actually in a stall?
It's really impossible to put an exact number on it. Certainly not 100%. Not everyone who thinks they're stalled is actually stalled, because if you define a stall solely by scale weight, meaning I've been doing keto for this many weeks or this many months and my scale weight hasn't changed, then yeah, that is a weight loss stall. That is. But it is really, really not uncommon. And people need to appreciate that this happens pretty frequently. It's not uncommon for your scale weight to stay the same while your size and shape are changing. So if your measurements are changing, or you notice that your clothing is getting looser, your scale weight might be stalled, but your fat loss is not. The change in your physique or your body composition is not stalled. So I much prefer the term fat loss over weight loss. We say weight loss because it just comes out of the mouth more easily, and that's what people search for. They search for, how do I lose weight? Very few people search specifically for fat loss, right? But it's very possible for people to lose a clothing size or two with either no change on the scale or less of a change than you would expect. And yeah, so I think there's a lot of people who think they're stalled, but they're not. And also stalls, we may have mentioned this in a previous video, where stalls are not defined in days or even a few weeks. If it's only been 3 or 4 days and you haven't lost any weight, that's not a stall. It's normal for the body to stay the same for a while and then drop several pounds kind of overnight, stay the same for a while, drop a pound or two, gain a pound or two. It's very, very normal fluctuation that's not really body fat. It's usually water retention or other things due to all kinds of reasons that have nothing to do with the actual fat you're carrying. It's just weight fluctuation for other reasons. And if that's happening, that's not a stall.
Now, if someone has actually, in fact, stalled, one of the biggest myths is that the keto diet simply doesn't work for them. What are your thoughts on that?
I would say that the way they're implementing a keto diet isn't working for them. So keto, as you know, and as many of the listeners and followers know, keto means different things to different people. You know, there's kind of a scientific maybe definition of it, but depending on who you follow or whose program you're doing, keto could be any number of things. So when somebody writes to me and says, I'm doing keto and such situation, what do you mean by keto? What is keto to you? So I think keto works for almost everybody when it's done properly. And it just may mean that you need to tweak and change something about it.
So, I mean, if just off the top of my head, one of the big ones that come to mind immediately is that one of the biggest myths is that people think that they have to consume this, copious amounts of fat in order to get their, to raise their ketone levels and to hit their fat macros. And this is a big one that we see with stalls. Is that correct?
It's huge. It's huge. And it's because, to be clear, some people who do a ketogenic or low carb diet for the main purpose of fat loss can get great results eating a very high amount of fat. Like if it works for you, great. But if it's not working, if you are in a stall or in a plateau, it's long-term stalled, then remember, there's a huge myth out there that keto works by macros, that if you just line up the percentages of calories that you get from fat, protein, and carbohydrate, meaning your macronutrients, that's what macros are, the percentage of calories from those, if you just hit those numbers, that your body's a calculator and the math is lined up and the weight will just melt off of you. I think a lot of people know from personal experience that doesn't work. They're following an app, they're tracking, they're purposely eating certain foods or certain amounts of foods in order to have those numbers line up, but they're not getting the results they want. And one of the biggest myths, as you said, is this sort of chasing fat or thinking that you have to eat 75% fat or 80% fat. But the keto doesn't work that way. What makes keto work for most people is the absence of the carbohydrate or the very, very low carbohydrate intake, not the massive amounts of fat. And people, it's pretty logical when you think of it. We absolutely celebrate being able to eat delicious fatty foods with this way of eating. But if you are eating a little too much of those foods, if you're having too much heavy cream and butter and MCT oil and avocado and macadamia nuts, then your body is going to burn that fat rather than all of your stored body fat. So keto, like Dr. Westman says, keto is not a fat loss diet. It's a fat burning diet. So once you shift over to a ketogenic metabolism, you're burning fat. What you don't know is whether that fat is mostly from the food you're eating or mostly from your body. And so just going overboard on dietary fat means your body has less of a need to burn stored body fat instead.
Now, to add on to what you've been saying, in the same vein, how about this one? I'm eating too much protein and not enough fat, and that's why I'm stalling.
This is a very unfortunate misunderstanding that needs to, I don't want to use the word die, that's a little harsh. It needs to be forgotten. People have become concerned about protein on ketogenic diets because they've heard things like too much protein turns into sugar or it kicks you out of ketosis. And the fact is, that's true to some extent. There are biochemical processes in the body that can convert amino acids, which make up the structure of protein. Amino acids can be converted into glucose, but it doesn't happen automatically just because you eat a huge steak or a giant pork chop or piece of chicken. It happens under the right hormonal circumstances. And the same thing with ketosis. When you eat any food really besides fat, so carbohydrate or protein, does have a teeny, so protein, they call it anti-ketogenic in the sense that it does affect the ketone level a little bit, not as much as carbohydrate. But what people really need to understand is that you don't need to be in a deep level of ketosis to lose weight or to burn body fat. And protein is very filling, very satiating, and it not only that, it comes with a lot of the vitamins and minerals and nutrients that you don't get from isolated fats, from MCT oil and coconut oil and butter. Again, not that we're anti-fat, but eating those whole protein foods, the beef, bison, eggs, poultry, seafood, all that, you're getting all of these other things and it's keeping you full for a while. It takes a long time to digest protein. And protein isn't just muscles. It's your nails are protein, your hair, your skin, your bones, tendons, ligaments, enzymes. I mean, all kinds of things are made of protein. And I just think out of all the reasons for people to be stalled on a ketogenic diet, a high protein intake is almost last on the list. And I can say in 8 years of helping clients with this way of eating, not one time have I ever told somebody they were eating too much protein. If anything, it's been the opposite. I've had to convince people, women especially, to eat far more protein. So if you are using a keto diet primarily for the goal of fat loss, protein is your friend. There might be reasons if you have something like epilepsy or a severe neurological condition where you're using keto as a medical treatment almost, there may be a rationale for controlling the amount of protein you eat. But if you are primarily in this for overall wellness and fat loss and metabolic health, you do not need to skimp on protein. And that is last on the list of things that might be stalling you, if it makes it onto the list at all.
I've got another one for the list. How about my keto numbers aren't high enough and therefore I'm not losing fat? I'm in a store.
Right. Right. So like we said before, you don't have to have a high level of ketones to lose fat. Ketones are the result of breaking down and burning fat, not the cause. So it's not like if you check your ketone level in your blood or urine, oh, if I can just get my ketones higher, then I'll lose more weight. No, it's more like if I can just break down more fat, then my ketones will be higher. And in order to get a higher ketone level, you might have to do things that are actually counterproductive to the goal of losing body fat, such as eating more fat. If you eat more fat in a low carb or ketogenic diet, you probably will have higher ketones. If you restrict protein, you'll probably have higher ketones. But both of those methods are counterproductive to losing body fat. And it's just not necessary to chase those high ketones. And Dr. Weston has been at this for over 20 years, and he learned from the late, great Robert Atkins. And in Dr. Atkins's time, all that existed were the urine ketone strips. You couldn't even measure blood or breath ketones, not the average person. I mean, maybe if you were in a scientific study somewhere, you couldn't even measure this, and people did great. You didn't have to measure. You didn't need to know what your ketone level was to have this diet work wonderfully.
What about sweeteners and stalling?
That is a controversial topic. It depends on the type of sweetener. There are the sugar alcohols, which are the ones that end in etol, things like sorbitol, mannitol, xylitol. Some of those do so. Sugar alcohols are sweetening agents that give food a sweet taste, but they don't have quite the same effect in your body as regular sugar or corn syrup or something like that. They do have an effect, though. It's not as strong as in terms of your blood sugar and insulin. They do affect those things. It's just not quite as much as regular sugar. So if foods sweetened with sugar alcohols are a regular part of your life, it could be stalling you because your blood sugar and insulin could be a lot higher than you think they are. And we know that when insulin is elevated, the burning of fat is lessened. I mean, insulin, basically, we think of it as a blood sugar lowering hormone, but that's only one of so many other things insulin does. One of the big things insulin does is sort of decrease fat burning. And I'm doing this because the analogy I always use is I think of insulin like a security guard that stands outside your fat cell and doesn't let the fat escape. So, and the other issue is when foods are sweetened with some of these sweetening agents, it may not actually be the sweetener that's the problem. It's that what kind of foods typically have those sweeteners? The almond flour brownies, the coconut flour cookies, the fat bombs, the foods that are very, very calorie and fat dense too. So is it the sweetener, or is it the fact that you ate a morsel that was this big, but it was 300 calories because it was packed with cream cheese and oil and butter, and maybe it had a spoonful of the xylitol in it? And the other sweeteners, though, the artificial sweeteners, which are a separate category from sugar alcohols, artificial sweeteners are the ones that are basically 0 calorie, things like sucralose or saccharin or aspartame, which at least in the US, they go by the brands Splenda, Sweet and Low, or Equal, and there's some other brands too. There's a lot of misinformation out there. These typically have almost no effect whatsoever on blood sugar and insulin. What they can do for some people is keep the sugar craving going. There are some people who, when they taste something sweet, even if it's from artificial sweetener, it provokes constant cravings for more and more sweet. And so if you're giving into that, that could be a problem. For me personally, I can have a pack of sweetener in my coffee and I don't feel the need for anything else sweet throughout the morning or the whole day. So I think there's a lot of so in terms of the sweeteners being a big cause for stalls, I would look at what kind of sweeteners are being used, and then what are they being used to sweeten? Are you having a pack of Splenda in a cup of coffee, or are you having xylitol or mannitol in a keto chocolate bar or a keto cake, where it might not be the sweetener at all, but it's the thing that is being sweetened? That's the issue.
Very good points there. And I've got my last one on the list is, how about my friend has lost triple the amount of weight I have, so I must be in a store.
So yeah, it's human nature to compare ourselves to somebody else, and it is a losing battle every time. Especially women, do not compare your fat loss to a man's. Never. You you're just going to lose every time. I mean, not every, there may be some exceptions. For the most part, men lose fat a lot faster than women, even when men are not quite as strict or as diligent with the diet. Just because of the testosterone or the muscle mass, men have a lot more leeway than women do. It's just the way it is. And older people also tend to lose more slowly than younger people. All you can really do is just do what you know is right for you and trust the process. And very, very slow fat loss is still fat loss. Do you wish it was happening at triple the rate? Yes. Is there a whole lot you can do about it? Not really. It is demoralizing. It's discouraging, but just know that it happens. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. Some people just, and especially depending on the medical situation, there are medications that make it more difficult to lose weight. So there's a lot of different things that play into it. And, examine what you're doing. Maybe there are changes you can make to get things moving more quickly, but it really just varies the rate at which people lose weight. You can't compare and despair, as we call it. Try to stay away from that.
Well, Amy, thank you so much. You've given us really a lot to think about and some great information. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Now, yeah, that's all we have for today. Now, folks, don't forget to grab your bonus. It's your free Amy Berger's free copy of 8 Reasons Not to Trust the Scale. And we'll put a link for you in the description. As always, if you'd like to learn more about Adapt Your Life Academy and our upcoming courses, I know that we are only mentioning this now for the first time, but Amy Berger has got a great course that's going to be launching in March. And it's we're not going to let the cat out the bag just yet, but it is a great course. So head on over to www.adaptyourlifeacademy.com and go and look at the courses that are available. And if you enjoyed this video and you'd like to see future videos, you can find us on our YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts under the name of Adapt Your Life. Amy, thank you so much. And we look forward to chatting with you next week for another episode of Conversations with Amy Berger. Thank you.
Thank you.